Hi everyone, welcome back. No, save the applauses for the for the speaker. So welcome for this third afternoon conference where we are going to talk about, well, I'm not going to talk, the speaker is going to talk about a subject that we all love or hate, which is CSS. As we all know, web technologies, they evolve fast, especially when it comes to JavaScript frameworks. But sometimes we are not that up to date with our knowledge of what is possible with technologies that were out years and years ago. So, today, with an amazing speaker by the name of Adam Argyle, we are going to see, and I'm waiting for you to have a big round of applause, the awesome things in CSS for the year 2024.
Just kidding. I got energy. Well, hello. Thanks for coming to the CSS talk. My name is Adam Argyle, as he said, and I'm going to ramp you up to the amazing things that have happened over the past couple years. It says CSS in 2024, but that's just assuming that you kind of didn't know what happened in 2022 or 2023. My slides are built with web technology, and they're built with a lot of the CSS features that we're going to see today. There's also a link down here. You can go find this online, all of the slides, all of the demos. There's a lot of demos. So let's move on. Notice right away, I have page transitions. Look at the URL bar. Do you see it changing? 01, 02. I just built this site with Astro, but I get transitions between these pages, and that's the feature called view transitions. And so this first thing that you can take from this talk, if this is all you remember is just this one thing, it's this line of code right here. In fact, I'm going to bump it up a little bit. We'll see if that bites me later, but maybe not. View transition navigation auto. If you put this in your style sheet today and you have a legacy website or just something that changes the URL, this will crossfade with link clicks. That's it, one line of code. And you're signaling to the browser, I want page transitions across my full URL navigations. And you're done. Now, if you want, you can add another line of code. And this one, I'm going to add it to my nav bar, because when I click and the full page crossfades, maybe I want the nav bar to remain and not move at all and look and feel like a single page application without having to do anything with a router. This is what you do here. You name your items. And so I'll say view transition name, persist nav. And now this nav will be persisted across page navigation. And it gets more elaborate as you want, as we can see here with mine that do full-on transitions. So this is me saying this title has the same name on page 1 as it does on page 2. And the browser goes, oh, I'll take a picture of that one here, and I'll take a picture of the future one, and I'll blend them together for you automatically. I didn't write any of those keyframes. Those are supplied by the browser just because I've given them the same name across 2 pages. So view transitions, super duper cool, very easy to get started with. Also, they could be complex as you start to do really kind of fancy things with them. And you can see the browser support down here. It's also kind of a nice thing to just upgrade with. So we can see this CSS line of code here. That's all you need to get started. If the site or the browser doesn't support it yet, they'll just get an instant page navigation as they always do. But if they're on a browser, which Safari's working on these, and Firefox, it will crossfade between them. Oh, look, there's a checkbox down here now in Safari. That's new. I'm serious. That wasn't there just the other day. The benefits of using a data endpoint. Okay, so another thing that you might not know that has come out is the media query range syntax. And maybe you don't like saying at media, screen, min width, colon, and you're like, is min width the one I want, or did I want width? Anyway, you can now just specify width less than or equal to a value, or greater than or equal to a value, or just greater than a value. There's all sorts of little combinations you can do. You can even put width in the middle of 2 other ones. And I find this to be way easier to read, and maybe you will too. It goes even further. You can combine it with container queries, which we'll get into here in a minute. So you can say if it's above 20 characters but less than 50 characters wide, then trigger this media query and apply some alternative styles. And then here's a card where you can also now, with CSS nesting, nest your media queries and nest your media query ranges right inside of your context that you're working inside of. So you don't have to start a new media query. You can just nest them right where you are. And this one says container type inline size, which says this grid card container wants to be a container and of its width. And now any child can query this card grid to say, hey, how wide is my container? If it's above 20, less than 50, I want to change the way that I look. And we'll see some cool demos that do that. So that's the media query range syntax, which kind of led us into container queries. Anyone using container queries in production? Oh, that's not enough hands. It's okay, you can almost fully convert right now. You can take all your media queries and just be like @media replace with @container, and pretty much everything works the same, because if you have no containers, the page is a default container for you. So just a quick little tip in case you want to start working that way. And so here's how container queries work. First, there's a shorthand, define a container. So something needs to state, I am a container, and my name is my first container query, and then you can do / what it actually wants to contain. And there's different things. You can contain height and width, so if you want to query height and width, which I'll have a demo for in a second, you can do that. This is what the nearest container syntax looks like. So while that container gave itself a name, you can query things by name or just find the nearest container. And this is really helpful for if you have like a widget that needs to go in a sidebar or in the page or in the top navigation, it can ask for the specific name of the container it's in and adapt itself. So you now have containers that can control their own logic and their own presentation based on how much space they have available, right? This is like the holy grail that we've been waiting for a long time. Here it is, asking for one by name. So this one's saying, hey, container, my first CQ, what's your size? I'm going to adjust myself based on that. We have this one, I call this the perfect bento. So a bento box is kind of like you got like one big square and 4 little ones, and it all makes a perfect little box. And you can use container queries to make a very cool adaptive one. So in this example, I've got a container saying, I'm perfect bento, and I contain size. I'm actually going to query the height and the width in this one. So then my child layout says, hey, container perfect bento, are you in landscape mode? Are you in a orientation where the width is more than the height? Then I want to change my grid flow direction. So let's check that out really quick. Launch our first demo. Dun, dun, dun. This one is the perfect bento. So here we go. Well, this is our bento. I can also add and remove boxes just for funsies, but see, we're in portrait mode. And I'm going to adjust to landscape and get a different layout. And it also knows how many items are in there. So I call it the perfect bento because no matter how many items you give it, it will always choose a smart layout. So I'm combining container queries that can query the orientation of the container, and I'm querying how many children are there. That's why this knows if there's 4 or if there's 3 and how to adapt the layout on it. So all these demos are going to be available. That one I call the perfect bento. I think it's pretty cool. And then there's also this, container query units. So you can not only query the container, you can reference your self-size with units that represent the percentage of that container. So in this case, it's 50% of the CQI, which is container query inline, which is kind of the same thing as container query width, except you're telling it in logical property terms. And there's also CQW. So in case you want to use the physical units instead of the logical units, you can say CQW. And then there's CQB, which is container query block, but you can also say CQH for container query height. So there's new units, new ways for you to adapt within a container. Pretty cool. And look at the support everywhere since 23. That's why I'm like, y'all don't have it yet? It's kind of old. That's the point of this talk, is you're like, I'm here because I don't know what's new. So here's another really rad feature called Cascade Layers. And have you ever had that problem where you've got that one index style sheet that's importing all of the things in a very specific order? You're like, don't touch it. We need those items to be loaded before those other ones, or else it all falls apart, and you're managing this one index file. We used to call them master.style or master.sass, but now we have an index.css, and we can use Cascade Layers to not care about this anymore. And maybe you've already been doing this with Tailwind. They have a post-CSS plugin that allows you to do something similar. But in this case, I'm defining 3 layers. A design system layer that is weaker than the components layer, that is weaker than the utilities layer. And I define these up front. And I say my application will be made of 3 layers of styles. And what's nice is later, I can import things into these layers. I can say, hey, bring in my design system colors, my design system easings, but then when I import components, I want to put components into that components layer. And look, I'm even putting them into a sublayer. So you have nested layers inside of other layers. Now, this doesn't right now look like it's solving that initial problem, but what this does solve is I can load these in any order I want, and the browser will stick them into that layer that I told it to, which means the order doesn't matter anymore. It matters what layer is in. And it also means if I'm asynchronously loading components or asynchronously loading things, I can stick them into a layer way up top. So it's not append-only loading. You can append into a specific spot that fits into the precedence and the order of styles that you want. Also kind of cool, a container layer, or like a cascade layer that is more important than another one. If another one has something important inside of it, the one that's more important, like the one that you said is, the more important layer or whatever, can override those importance without using an important. So you can kind of really manage specificity and trap it inside of these cascade layers. Here's another way to do it. You can just define a layer and put your component styles right inside of it. So this one's saying, hey, I'm going to put myself into the components layer at .nav.primary, and here's my styles for the nav element. And now they all, no matter when they get loaded, they get put right into the specific layer that goes into the cascade order that you're looking for. And then you'll see me do this a lot in my demos, where I'll have demo code not in a layer, and then I'll have a layer down below called demo.support. And what I'm trying to say here is these support styles. You know when you open up a code pen and you're like, someone hit enter like 50 times, and then there's just a bunch of code at the bottom that they're like, ignore this. This was just to make the demo pretty. The demo's actually about this top stuff. Well, I can do that right in CSS now and make it very clear in the way that I'm writing the styles and articulate it in a layer, which is kind of cool. So you're going to see those in a lot of my demos. And here is one of our first CSS properties that's just kind of people don't know about. And this one, all you have to do is see it. So this one's called paint order, and I'm calling it custom blended text strokes. So you see this paint order stroke, then fill. You're like, that doesn't mean anything to me, Adam. I don't know what that means. Yeah, but this means something to you. The top one stinks, and the bottom one rules. And the only difference is I changed the paint order. I said the top one is the default paint order. And the bottom one, I said, hey, I want you to fill the strokes first, and then do the fill. And you can see the difference. Super CSS World looks a lot more like Super Mario World than the top one, which looks like an accident. And that's just one CSS property you haven't heard of yet. That one's paint order. It's available everywhere. It's kind of old. This one's a little newer, and you can see the limited usage down here. This one's called field sizing. Have you ever had that problem where like the select element is the length of its widest option? This one drives me nuts because you can have like yes, no, maybe not, and in some other scenarios I would like that. And then the select element just takes the width of the longest option. You're like, no, I want you to be the width of the one I've chosen. Well, that's really easy now with this property called field sizing content. Same thing with an input. Same thing with a text area. Who's made a text area that has JavaScript watching for making sure that the lines, if they go too far, then you increase the height of the text area, and then you have to do this whole juggle. It's now one line of CSS. Let's check out a demo. This one's just kind of easier to see. All right, I'll open up both demos. We'll see what they're both doing here. So here's a field sizing example. Maybe I'll zoom in here a little bit. So here's all of it without. This is that text area I'm talking about. You're like, as a user, that's really annoying. But here's with it. It's just one line of CSS. Gotta love it. But it applies to many different inputs. So here's that one I'm talking about. It's the length of its really long, annoying option. And here, this one shrinks to fit whatever I've chosen. And that is good stuff. That helps it fit with inside of your designs a little bit better. This one here, this is a text input, doesn't grow. This one does grow. Notice a select multiple grows to the height of all of its items. Here's an email input, grows to whatever I type in, and a number input that grows to whatever I type in. Pretty cool stuff when this one over here does not. So this is just one CSS property, and I find this one really valuable in the dynamic nature. Now, the only thing you need to know about when you set field sizing to content on your inputs is you're going to have to get a little bit defensive with your styles because it will collapse the input into, like if you don't have a placeholder and there's no value in the input, it squeezes down to like nothing. And so you got to give something a min width and usually also a max width, since that way it's no longer like, you see the without, it doesn't grow or shrink, but when it starts to grow and shrink, you're like, I'm gonna kind of need to manage that so it looks a little bit better. So there's some defensive styles you can put in there. And here's an example of like some of my defensive styles. Min block size. Also look at this sweet unit, the root line height unit. Did you know there's a line height unit? There's also a cap unit, there's a character unit. There's so many units now. I think there's 54. That's not in my talk, but there's 54 units, and they're all really handy, especially when you're like typing stuff like this line height unit obeys and looks at intrinsically at the font that's being used and its size based on it. Really cool stuff. Let's also look at this one. This one's a little bit prettier. We've got a nicer looking select and a nicer looking input. You can see it fits what's in there. Also notice it fits what the placeholder is. So it's like your placeholder perfectly sets the size of the input, and that can be really handy. I'll set that back to 0. Cool, so that's field sizing. Let's look. Okay, here's an example of that defensive styles. So we have SVH, which is small viewport height. We're talking about all those new units. There's a lot of them. Here's 3LH. I really like the line height unit. You can also use custom properties from your design system. And the select a min inline size is really healthy too, in case there's not an option chosen. Color scheme is another one. So whenever you start a new project or you make a new demo and you want to have a light and a dark mode, the browser has been providing light mode for all these years. And now if you want a dark mode, automatically provided by the browser, you can just say color scheme, I support light and dark. And now if the user's in a dark mode preference, the page by default, the browser has supplied styles for dark mode. And that's all you need. You can start a light and a dark adaptive website with that one line of code. And it gets better than that too. Let's check this one out. So with the color scheme property, you can then pair it with the light-dark function, which allows you to pass 2 different colors that match to whatever the user's preference is in. So you're saying, I want a light and a dark website, and if the color, or if the user is in a light preference, use this as the text color, and if they're in a dark preference, use this as the text color. And this used to be lots of code. You would have to have duplication, a media query, and other things, and now it's just a one-liner to have your colors adapt to a light and a dark scenario. It's kind of cool, I think. And here's another good use case, is you can pin these, so you can set the color scheme not just on the entire document, you can set it on a container, on a component, or on a section. So let's check out a couple examples. See it in action. So here's color scheme being used to make 2 different colored sections, and notice how they nest perfectly. This is typically a really hard problem to do in a light and a dark adaptive website, and this makes it pretty simple. I can just set color scheme to dark whenever the class there is dark, and color scheme to light whenever it's light, and then I have my light and my dark functions. Now, if you look at like Tailwind or how some of these other systems, or even like Stylex, try to do something like this, it's a lot of work, and the browser's providing these 2 primitives that make it really, really easy. And here's another example. This one is using style queries. So in case you didn't know, those are a thing. In style queries, you can query the value of the color scheme custom property. So here I'm setting the custom property, and then, well, I'm kind of like initializing it as the color scheme, and here I set it in both cases, and then I can query that. And what's nice, the limit of the light-dark function is it only accepts colors. You can only say in light mode, here's a color, dark mode, here's a color. With a style query, you can do more, and that's why I've shown a border on them. You can adapt to more than just the color. You can adapt your entire layout. You can adapt the borders. You can adapt your shadows. Everything can adapt that's not just a color. And it becomes really important as you build out these robust light and dark components. So cool. Enjoy color scheme. I really like that one. We kind of covered the light-dark function a little bit, but we'll go into it a little bit more as we look at usages with a border. So let's say you did want a border, but you didn't need to change the border width or the way that it's dashed or solid, and you just want to change the color. Cool, pop it right there, just in time. In your border color, light and dark, specify what you need. And then here is a really easy light and dark custom property adaptive system. So if you want to just set these as your custom properties, and now as a front-end developer using this design system, all I have to think about is surface 1 or surface 2, text 1 or text 2, text primary, text secondary, whatever you want to name these. And look, this whole definition is here. This used to be a lot of layers of duplication, and now it's not. Pretty sweet. Another one that you can kind of tap into that the browser provides a lot of sort of sane defaults for you is this this concept of accent color. And accent color, if I specify to hot pink, this is another one. You just got to see it. Yeah, here's a whole bunch of inputs. Have you ever wanted to tint the radio buttons or the slider or the progress or a checkbox to a custom color? Let's choose, oh yeah, red, because we're doing like a bloody day. Yeah, it's bloody. Yeah, so look at that. The browser's just like, cool, give me a color. I'll tint all the inputs for you. Then you don't have to go customize everything about the checkbox and customize everything about the slider and blah, blah, blah. If you just want to tint it with your brand, boom, accent color is right there. And I'm just going to change the color again because it's fun. To hot pink. Oh, wait. Oh, here's a cool feature. Look at the background color, how it's white. The browser automatically finds a contrasting color for you. So look, if I go into a light purple, it maintains contrast for you. It will change the checkbox color. It'll change the other colors around these inputs to make sure that there's proper contrast so that you don't have to manage it, which is kind of nice. So that's accent color. and it's just set like this, accent color black. Oh, so yeah, because I got another demo, right? Oh yeah, this one's cool. This one uses app property to type the custom property that's being used on the circle, which allows me to transition this circle. So as I pull up the slider, I get a really cool effect. And then that circle's using a blend mode to invert the colors that are behind it. So I just combined a couple things, right? I set accent color to black on the slider. I'm like, yeah, I want a gothic slider, super hardcore. It's a day of horror. And then I put this tied up to a circle, which is a gradient, and then I can animate the gradient growing and shrinking with app property. And I'm pretty sure app property is next. Yeah, see, a lot of these demos lead right into the next one. So app property here is a type-safe, interpolatable CSS variable. So CSS variables, before app property, they were treated like strings, just like a variable in JavaScript. It goes, hey, you can make this the number 23, or you can make it the string of 23. And you're like, that is fun when I'm new, but it's really annoying when I'm getting good at programming. CSS has the same concept here. You can make a custom property type safe and say that it only accepts color. So see this one? Look, unbreakable color. Because have you ever had like a color in your design system, and then later you redefine the custom property, and then you accidentally spelled the color wrong? Like instead of white, you wrote shite or something like that, which is really easy. W and S, they're right next to each other. Anyway, it would break your whole design system because the browser's like, I don't know what color that is. And you made a whole design system based off of that, and now it's broken. But in this case, we set the type, the syntax to color. Inherits is a whole other subject, but we'll get into that. And then initial value, which means if someone does try to set this to something that isn't valid, like unbreakable colors equal 23, well, the browser would go, well, 23 is not a color, so I won't even accept that, and I'll go back to my last known valid value, and maybe that's the initial value. So you have type-safe custom properties. And I mentioned that they're interpolatable, which means that if you set it to initial value of 0%, and this one's a percentage type, I can now animate it on hover. It will animate and transition the value from 0% to 100% over 1 second. And now you can use this custom property anywhere where percentages are accepted and make really cool new animations that feel a lot like a scalpel. You type safe to variable, and then you put that variable somewhere very specific, like the left position or something like that, and now you can animate that value as if it's just that one little thing, which is kind of cool. You don't have to redefine the whole translate left or translate X. You can just animate the value that's inside of translate X. It's cool stuff. And then since I showed transitions on hover, you can also set them in keyframes. So here, I'm going to use keyframes and animate to 100%. Kind of cool. I got a couple fun demos. Yeah, let's look at the demos. Oh, I can't reach them because I zoomed in. There we go. Oh, yeah, everyone whip out your phone. We're about to join up. Okay, go to noisy.netlify.app. And we're all going to join the jam room of jam room number 1. And I'm going to enable my microphone. Yeah, allow this time. Okay, so as I talk, I'm taking the audio input, I'm splitting it into 2 tracks, and I'm animating gradients based on those 2 tracks. Now, whoever joins will see, oh, look, we got a joiner, we've got a couple joiners. When they enable their microphone, the sounds that they make next to their phone will show up here. So we won't hear anything. Ah, see how cool that is? Now you can also go to the settings, and I'm going to change mine to linear. And someone else can change theirs to conic, and we are making noise. That's why I called it noisy, because you can see the noise. You can't actually hear anything, but you can see it. I thought that was kind of cool. Hey, 16 people are in here. Yeah, party kit. Woohoo! Anyway, this is powered all by CSS typed custom properties using app property. That's the whole reason this looks, ooh, someone set it to conic. Excellent. Cool, I'm going to bail and move on. So here's another example. It's really hard to animate a mask. Masks are super powerful, but since they were a big, long image in CSS, you couldn't animate them. But with app property, you're typing the value, and that means the browser now knows I will always expect a color here, or I'll always expect a size. And if it always knows to expect that, it can animate it. It's just like in JavaScript, where it's like, I can't animate from the number 23 to the string of 23. I just don't know how to do that. But if you tell the browser this will always be a number, it can assume it's always a number and give you cool effects like this. So I'm holding Option, and I'm just transitioning a length value and using the length value in a mask, and then also using your cursor position to position the mask. And I get this really cool effect for just a few lines of code using app property. Oh, yeah. we got more. Scroll-driven animation. I love this one. If you go to my website, nerdy.dev, there's tons of scroll-driven animation. This is really fun as a progressive enhancement. You can also put this behind the prefers reduced motion media query, so make sure you don't make anybody sick. But it's kind of, if you know how to use keyframes, you already know how to use scroll-driven animation. What you're going to change is you're like, hey, keyframes always run, right? They're just like going with the screen refresh rate. But if you set the animation timeline to scroll, well, then that animation will stay stationary, but as you scroll, it will play through the keyframes. Let's just see a quick little example here. Yes, so this one, I'm going to use app properties. So see, I set an angle, and it's 0 degrees. When I scroll to the bottom of the page, it's going to be the angle of 360, which means I'm going to go through every color in the rainbow on scroll. Ah, it's so pretty. And it was just a few lines. So here's my animation. Look, I'm animating that custom property to hue 360, and then I'm using it down here, animation, cycle to hue, on scroll, just like I showed you. And you can get a cool effect. And the browser is like buttery smooth with this stuff, which is really, really nice. No JavaScript library is needed, really easy to progressively enhance. So let's check out another example here. We've got animate on viewport intersections. So that first demo was the entire scroll runway. I like to think about it like a runway. And it makes your timeline of your animation the same thing as scroll. So as you're scrolling, it's like you're moving the track head. But what if I want to animate something as it enters the viewport and as it exits the viewport? CSS has your back. Just change the animation timeline to view. Whoop-de-doo, it's a piece of cake. Let's check it out. Oh, that's another scroll one. Ooh, yeah, here's a view one. What's this scroll one? Oh, yeah, this scroll demo is cool. Oh yeah, here, check this out. So this one it looks really cool, but it's also like super simple. There's a CSS grid that's position fixed on the viewport and has a whole bunch of little cells, and there's a bunch of little words in there. And then I just put 3D perspective on the viewport and push some of them back and some of them forward, and then on scroll, I animate them. It's like a really simple trick, and look, it's going through CSS features. It's so meta. Anyway, let's look at a view demo. Here's a view demo. This one's cool because each element has a unique entry into the viewport, right? Whereas on scroll, they kind of all were tied into the same timeline. These ones each get their own individual timeline based on their own intersection, which means their own height and width and their own position in the DOM. And look at this. I'm animating all these items in. They all share the same animation, but they all get a unique treatment. They all stagger natural. I call it like a natural stagger because I didn't have to go explicitly say, 30 milliseconds later, you should scale, and 30 milliseconds after that, you should scale. I don't have to do that. All I had to do is be like, all y'all, just animate on view. Handle yourself. And they do it. Let's check out the code real quick here. Look, this is it. This is like the effect. Go from opacity 0. See how they're like faded out. I want them to have no box shadow when they're out. See, now they have a box shadow when they're in. Scale out. So this is their exit stage position. And when they scroll in, they're just going to go to their natural resting place. Let's look at that. Here you go. If you prefer reduce motion, if you have no preference, and if the browser supports animation timeline view, then I'm going to use that slide in keyframes. I'm going to set the animation timeline to view, and then you can specify what parts of the intersection that you want to animate on. And that's why these enter and don't leave. So they enter in at that bottom little, just as they're contained. There's all sorts of cool tools. Yeah, look at contain 50%. So once this element reaches 50% into the viewport, it completes its animation. And you can customize when it does these things. This is really, really fun stuff. Let's see. So there's the at supports thing. We just kind of looked at that. So let's look at a couple more demos because these are just so much fun to see. Did we skip this demo? I don't know. Yeah, scrolly telling. Yeah, look, how many times have you seen something like this? You're like, yeah, I love that. That's a great way to tell a story. Well, use CSS scroll-driven animation. I've given you everything that you need right there. Here's another one I really like. This is me animating a variable font. This variable font has an axis. I can't remember what they called it. Oh, morph is what it's. Oh, yeah, morph. Look. So I'm animating the font variation settings from morph 0 to morph 60. And you can see it kind of does these cool little drippy, gooey things. Anyway, I get to scroll experience its gooey morphages. That's great. And then this is a really fun demo I built. This feels like the iOS app switcher, doesn't it? Look at this. And that's all just using CSS and scroll snap. So scroll snap and scroll-driven animations make a really, really nice pair. And I think you can even click these to go to it. Yeah, see, that's good stuff. Oh, yeah. And it's all off the main thread. So one of the benefits of this is there's no JavaScript library. There's no watching scroll. The browser knows what it needs to do, and it does these things off the main thread, which means it's using the GPU, which means it's very, very likely to be extremely high performant. That was scroll-driven animations. Let's talk about the linear easing function. So this is a great way to bring different kinds of vibes to your easing. So any animators out there are going to know that like easing makes a big difference about how something feels. And linear allows you to simulate spring effects, bounce effects, and wild stuff. And it looks like this. This is so easy to read, right? Yeah, I fall asleep writing percentages like this. We don't expect anyone to write these. What we do expect you to do, though, is put them in a custom property and then use them like this. So now we can get a spring animation and just use a custom property. So there's already libraries that have all these things in there, and there's also a generator. We'll go check that out. Like, oh yeah, so OpenProps has them, which is a library I maintain, which is just free variables, and there's all sorts of springs and bounces and other effects that you can just use. Let's go see what kind of vibes we can get with this stuff. Okay, so this one's called Bouncy Focus. See, it's just a subtle little bounce. You don't have to go extreme with your bounces and your springs. They can bring just a little bit of extra life, and it just changes the whole vibe of the way these buttons work. I think I can tab into them too. Yeah, see, that's nice. And then if you hit spacebar, that's cool stuff. All using a linear easing right here. Elastic out. Oh no, look, I'm looking for support, so if the browser doesn't support it, and here it is, Ease Spring 3. Here's a generator me and Jake Archibald built. He did the tech work, I did the design, and this allows you to import an easing algorithm or an kind of like a path from SVG and turn that into a spring or turn that into an easing function, a linear function, so that you can go to a generator, dial in everything that you're looking for, and export it. Really nice. And then here is OpenProps, which has all of them laid out here. So here's this 5 strengths of springs and 5 strengths of bounces. And what I like about the bounces is the number there. So like ease 5, it bounces 5 times, and the ease bounce 1 only bounces once. So let's say you want to bounce a ball, and you're like, I only want to bounce twice. Well, use the var ease bounce 2, and it'll go boink, boink. Kind of fun. Anyway, little stuff, I'm telling you, it goes a long way. Lots of little stuff goes a long way. Here's one, reduce transparency. This is one of those things where like it might sound really annoying. You're like, some users don't like it when interfaces are semi-transparent. They can't read it. And you're like, okay, that actually kind of makes sense. But some people will be like, that's annoying. I'm like, it's not annoying. It's a design challenge, and you can do really cool stuff with it. Check this out. So some people might have been tempted to, here, let's go to here. Some people might have been tempted to like just make this black right here. But look, you can use the prefers reduced transparency feature to check and do something more elegant. I actually kind of like the one on the right better than I like the one on the left. So these things don't have to be hindrances. They can be design opportunities, and reduced transparency is very much like that. Here's one where it adapts the kind of blurred glass effect, this glass effect, to the light mode or dark mode. And you just get to use a couple custom properties, and reduced transparency can be used to just make the alpha bump up. So in case someone does want reduced transparency, you're like, reduce the amount of color that it's absorbing from the backdrop. And that's just a couple lines of code. So these things can be really fun as well. So here's one that's like silly. Look, I've got a select element, an option, and an HR. And you're like, why, what does that do? Well, if I pop it open, look, I got little horizontal rules in here. You can break up all the options. That's it, that's the demo. There's also a new search element, which I don't think a lot of people know about. The search element allows you to kind of more semantically represent that these groups of forms are going to perform a search. So assistive technology can inform people about it better, and here's a good example. And then you can also combine it with the list attribute, which can point to a data list, and you get autocomplete. So let's see, Ace Ventura. Yeah, look, it's down there, suggested. I can also click this and see the suggestions, which is kind of cool. Oh, look, some Chromium ones are popping in there. That's funny. Where'd those come from? Anyway, 2 kind of cool features nested in there for you, the list and data list feature and the search element. Just things I don't think people know about. And look at baseline for a year. So maybe you've implemented search, but you didn't know there was a search element. Now you do. This one is cool. This is user valid and user invalid. So we've had valid and invalid as CSS pseudo classes for a long time, and I call them eager because they'll yell at a user before they've even interacted with the form. So like if you have invalid, make the border red. Here, let's just see it. It's just so annoying when you open up a demo or like you open up a a form and it's already mad at you. So look, this one says it's currently invalid. You're like, I haven't even interacted with it yet. It's invalid. You're like, get out of my face. I haven't even done anything yet. It's okay, great, it's valid. But notice how user invalid showed up lazy after I interacted with it and I blurred the input. Then it's active. And then this one too. So this is a much more polite way to represent whether or not someone has interacted with the form and then something is valid or invalid. And it's just a couple lines of code. So we see user invalid. We've got label has user valid. Oh yeah, you can combine these together. Let's just look at a couple more demos. So here's an angry one. See, it's invalid. You're like, I haven't even given you my email. Why are you telling me I'm wrong? That's rude. And this one over here is like, no, you gotta put something in first, and then I'll tell you if you're wrong. And here, let's make it wrong by like not putting an email. See, that's much more polite. Same thing with valid. Although valid, you can see, is not eager to tell you that you're right. Some reason the browser's eager to tell you you're wrong, though. It's rude. And here's a squiggly. So if I type in here and I'm wrong, I can highlight the label. So I can use this user invalid after they've interacted with it to then mark the associated label, and you get kind of a cool effect like that. It's probably pretty tiny anyway. And then a green check mark. So let's say it's good. Yeah, this is a very valid looking email, right? And there it is looking nice. So all from CSS. You don't always have to have JavaScript doing all these jobs. Is there anything else interesting in here? This was the check mark. Oh yeah, this is how I did it. So I said if the label has a sibling next to it that is valid, then put an after element that's a green check mark. And notice I'm using nesting here. So inside of an input, the input owns its association with a label. And that's what this and does. So this lets it reach into any label that has an input that's, anyway, it's cool. Nesting is cool. An exclusive accordion. So if you've ever had like a summary details element that you wanted to close the other ones when a new one opens, very much like an accordion does. That's now just one property away. You put a name on there, just like a radio input. Look, they share the same name, linked accordions, and now it'll close the old one and open up a new one. This demo also has a nested feature. Notice how it's animated. How did I animate the summary details element? Well, we now have this feature called interpolate size, allow keywords, which allows it to animate dynamically based on the content inside of each of these. And I can target them and see how it like fades in our content and kind of slides in. I can do all of that from CSS. It's really cool stuff. So go check out the details content pseudo class. This is what allows you to tap into that slotted content that you're putting inside of a summary details. And then allow keywords allows you to animate to height auto. It's really cool stuff. And that is exclusive accordion plus animation. There's a whole bunch of new math that showed up. So there's all sorts of trigs. If you're doing all your trig in JavaScript right now, you could also give it to CSS. Just set some custom properties. They've got sine, cosine, tan, pow, atan, asine, acosine. You can do radial layouts. So I've got like you don't always have to do a list that's vertical. You could do a circular layout just using a couple things. I've got cosine and sine that are allowing me to represent an angle and animate these things in an offset. It's really cool stuff. You can also do physics. Let's see if my physics one is in here. Demo. Oh, yeah, hold on. There's a lot of little math demos. Math turns out to be pretty cool when you want to do demos. So here's someone animating on a sine. So sine goes like this, and they're animating a bird along that path, also using custom properties with app property. We can change the duration. This is pretty fun stuff. Anyway, so we got a bird flying. We can see the path that bird was flying here. So this is another code pen that someone made that just demoing the visual of what cosine can do for you. As an oscillation, you can make a really meaningful type ramp. Look at this. So I've got clamp 1 rem, so it'll never go below 1 rem. I do 1 view W times pow, 1.75, whatever the multiplier is. And then I can set a typography ramp that's based on a multiplier. And look at my nice little arc I get. Although this little outlier here is looking funny. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's H5 is N1. I don't know. Maybe. Oh, I know why. It's because we've zoomed. I used the VW unit so that I get a responsive type ramp. Anyway, kind of cool. I forgot I did that. Here's that cyclical radio group. And this one I thought was fun because radio groups, they automatically go back to the beginning if you hit the end. It's just like a cyclical thing in a radio group. And so I put it into a circle, and I was like, yeah, look, it's so meta. It goes in, it looks like a circle. I'm just having too much fun. You can also use math to make a really healthy color palette so that these things are actually working on an arc. So notice how the dark colors are not very saturated, and neither are the lightest colors, but in the middle, they go up into high saturation. So if you think about that oscillation that we were looking at earlier, cut it in half, so it's just this bell, and we can use that bell so that the darks and the lights are at the low chroma parts and the chroma's high in the middle. We can use these arcs and these signs to do really cool stuff. And then I also did some physics with it. Check this out. I don't expect you to read all this, but look at, oh, that's just funny. Look at that. But look, it's physics in CSS. There's nothing else going on here. And I can go and look, I even have a little settings widget. You can go change all the properties, as you saw up top, the mass, the stiffness, the damping, the velocity, and change the way that this thing floats and sits in space. And it looks like it has weight. That's because it does. It has mass. That's cool stuff. CSS math doing cool things. There's even more functions coming. We're not even going to go into these, but just expect these in the future. We have random coming to CSS, random item. We have sibling count and sibling index. Have you ever used Sass just to go I, and increment I so that it knows what position it is in the thing? You can just ask sibling index, and that'll tell you its position next to its siblings, and sibling count tells you the total number of siblings it has. So you can do a lot of really cool features with sibling count and sibling index. We've also got the progress, media progress, container progress, max, or mix, calc mix, crossfade, transform mix, first valid toggle, and calc size, all new, mostly pure functions entering into CSS. This is a great one. This is text wrap. So if you've ever had text that's just not quite wrapping right, like maybe it has an orphan or a widow or something like that. So up top, we have what text is like today. So it's not balanced, and this one's not pretty. There's two values of ways that you can make your typography better. We have balanced and pretty. And so this is the not balanced, and here's balanced, and here's pretty. Pretty makes sure that there's no orphans, and balanced makes sure that they look like proper blocks. So look at the difference there. Balanced, not balanced. Balanced, not balanced. Close demo. Here's one where it's animated, so you can kind of see it work. We can also change the language to Arabic, and look at what it does too. So this is the browser doing this. This works across any language in any font. This isn't something you have to hard code with JavaScript, which is typically what people do today. They'll character count and try to find good line breaks. And it just makes really nice headlines. So look at how the top line is longer than the bottom one. Normally, you'd have to add your own line breaks to do that, but the browser is going to just figure that stuff out for you, which is really cool. It's going to try to keep that as a block as best as it can. And just look balanced. Awesome. Animation composition, this one you just have to see. This is where if you have two competing keyframes trying to animate something, this allows you to combine them by saying composite add. I want them to add the keyframes together, whereas the default is to kind of switch between the two. So this one has a forever pulsing animation, but when I hover, it's going to shake. And notice it shakes and pulses at the same time. That was not easy to do before animation composition. Color mix is a way for you to take a base color and add white to it, add black to it. You can build entire systems out of it. You can also add transparency to a color. So you take this background color and you're like, I want it to be 80% transparent. And it does that. You got color mix, the ability to nest color mix. So you can put color mix inside color mix. And CSS, of course, you got to be able to do that. And let's see a couple demos of what color mix can do. Here's color mixing black and white. And you saw that in sRGB thing here. This is telling it the color space that you want to operate in. And each color space does a different thing. You'd think all the color spaces would result in the same mix of black and white, but they don't. Color spaces matter. And here's where I'm using it to build an entire theme based off a base color. So you just supply it some sort of base, and you can build all of these different variations. It's really cool stuff. So color spaces we talked about. We've got I like to think about color spaces where we've been making websites that were like VHS, and now we have DVD colors. Remember when it was like Blu-ray, I don't need Blu-ray, and then you watched like Titanic on Blu-ray, and you're like, I need Blu-ray, those colors look a lot better. It's the same thing with your websites. All of your websites using hex or RGB are literally specifying 30-year-old color spaces because those were the lowest common denominator that we've had for all this time. And now we have HDR colors. They're called high dynamic range colors, and they offer more vibrant colors. So on a new computer, on a new phone, the colors of your website can be more vibrant than your competitors, and it can make for a really nice effect. You wouldn't believe that Apple was the first to do this. Oh, maybe you can, because the iPad looks so gorgeous, right? You get an iPad, and you're like, why does this look so delicious? And it's because they're using display P3 colors they have since 2016. So it makes sense why their app store and their apps look so good, is they're encouraging people to tap into that extra color space. I'm going to skip a few of these examples, but you can query to see if the browser supports high dynamic range. So in case you want to conditionally upgrade them, you can. And there's also better gradients. Like, let's see if I've got the gradient tool in here. Here, demo. The gradients can look so much better with the color space. It just changes the way that they interpolate. Yes, okay, so here's a color tool I made. You can go to gradient.style to try this color tool out. And here I'm just going from hot pink to cyan, and it's in HDR mode. And if I toggle this off, this is the gradient you get today. But if you specify the color space, you can change it to this. And like, here, let's just change a couple of these. So here's a nice juice. It looks like a peach, although I don't know what it looks like on that screen. And here's the gradient that you get today in sRGB if you specify hex colors. Here's what it is if you pass in the color space of OK Lab. OK Lab is a better blended space to make sure that you don't go through the dead zone. Look at the middle of this gradient. That's called the dead zone. That's where the shape of the color space, the gradient went straight to the other color, and it went through a kind of dull zone. So anyway, look at the difference here. You get much better gradient text. I'm not sure if those are coming in on the screen, but on my screen they look awesome. And then you can do neons, right? If you're doing these HDR colors, you might as well blast that color screen in there and really get a nice, hot, vibrant color. Cool, those are color spaces. Relative color syntax is a way for you to take one color and derive its color channel values and then do calculations on them. So in this one, I'm increasing the lightness by 25%, and in this one, I'm decreasing it by 75%. Or no, I'm increasing it by 25% again. Just one's using multiplication and one's using math. And there's all sorts of cool things you can do with this. I kind of prefer this over color mix, but you can make monochromatics. So look, I just specify a deep pink, and then I calculate the different steps. Got other little demos in here too. Here's one with a little bit of hue rotation. So if you always keep it monochromatic, it can look a little boring, but this one hue rotates just a little bit, and like I can change the base color and see how it affects all these different little gradients that we get. Super cool stuff. You can also use it to calculate contrast. So you can have almost guaranteed contrast by using OKLCH. You're saying from the color DDD, I want to change the lightness by 40%, and you can almost always guarantee a 4.5 ratio there. If you do 50, you can get a 7, and if you do 60, you can get 10. So you can kind of calculate out your properly contrasting colors. You can change the scroll bars. Look at this one. It's pink. All I do is say scroll bar color is hot pink, and then the background of the scroll bar is the same color as my page. And so now it looks like a floating bar, but you can also change the background color of it. You can also change the size. Scroll bar width of none, which makes it disappear, so you don't have to do any of those weird hacks anymore. And you can set the width to thin, which gives you a nice little one until you hover on it, and it becomes the normal size. Kind of cool little stuff. Starting style is a way for you to enter items into the viewport. So you say, like, where should I be off stage? Because then when I get put on the page, when I get inserted, I'll start there and then go to my natural resting place. So here's an example. All those items faded in and they kind of flew in because I said your starting style is scaled up and opacity 0. And that way when they get added to the page, so here I'll just add another one. I'll add another one. I'll add another one. Anytime they get added or removed or changed in any way, like where they get shuffled around, they'll animate in. You can also do this with dialogues. And you can do this with popovers. All dialogue's going to block everything in a popover. So you can animate. Starting style is extremely powerful. I've seen people use it for really cool things. The syntax can be nested. So you're saying transition, opacity, and scale, but start at opacity 0. So this is that effect. Present the thing. Now, anytime you append it, insert it, your JSX is putting an element in there, it'll float right in. Really cool stuff. The dialogue element is for synchronous blocking UI. We can see we have really great support on it now. There's ways to animate it. There's all sorts of cool interfaces on there. I'm going to skip through it real quick. We have popover for asynchronous, non-blocking UI. So in case you're wondering, dialogue and popover, they both show up, and they both show up in the top layer above everything, but why would I use one over the other? Well, dialogue is synchronous. This is a really important thing. Like, are you sure you want to delete that? You're like, that should be blocking the user. But a popover is for something like I hovered over some user and I want to see a little card. That shouldn't block me in any way, maybe for a tooltip or other sort of like ancillary information. Both of them are helpful to the screen reader, and they get driven focus into them and cool interactions like that. We have anchor positioning, which allows you to position things very intelligently next to other things. So we've got this toggle tip. So here I'll show the tool tip, which is a popover. Notice how it's going to switch to the bottom or the top automatically, and that's just a couple lines of code. This is, look, position area. So I'm telling it to start at the top. And hey, try flipping at the top and the bottom based on what has more space available. And it does that automatically. And also, if it goes off screen, the anchor, the thing it's attached to goes off screen, it hides itself. And that's this one, position visibility, anchors visible. Kind of cool stuff. All right, I'm getting low on time, but here's some tool tips. Again, using anchor positioning, making this really easy. The size can change. Like if I go to 100, it got wider, but it still stayed in the center, and I didn't have to do any of that calculation. It's just the browser automatically has keywords for being top center on something. Super cool. We have at scope, which is a way for you to limit the reach of a selector. I'm going to burn through that one. We have Textbox Trim, which is going to be next-gen ability to center stuff. So here I can trim the text. So this is why it's fit perfectly on the top and the bottom. I know the text box isn't there, but the way that this is fit is I trimmed off the extra leading on the top and the bottom, and when it's in this vertical state, and I can perfectly line things up. Like here's a good example. You've probably seen this problem before, where you've got a box, and you want your text to be aligned at the top and your other text to be aligned at the bottom, but it's not because of the way that CSS does padding. But look at this one. It is perfectly aligned at the top, and it is perfectly aligned at the bottom, and that's thanks to Textbox Trim Both Cap Alphabetic. I'm trimming it to the capital letter on both sides of the letter. Super cool stuff. That's going to be some next-gen stuff. And that was my talk, Amazing CSS in 2024. Thank you so much. Give me some feedback or some comments. Might have time for questions? No, I don't think so. But thanks for coming to this talk.